Don Armand, it is wonderful to have you on my show. I was introduced to you by the wonderful Chris Bentley, I guess a teammate from the Exeter Chiefs. When I looked you up online, Google said you're a Zimbabwean footballer. I was like, what? Of course, it is about rugby football. But in your own words, Don, who are you?
Hi, Minter. Yeah, thanks very much for having me on here. I mean, who am I? I always ask that, and I always get so intrigued as to how people answer. Who am I? I'd like to say as I identify as just good character, human, just like anyone else, and as anything else added to that is just a substrate of that identity. So, but in terms of just giving a bit more background, father of four, I've got a business that does leadership development, and I used to play professional rugby for Exeter Chiefs and had a dabble at playing for England too. So it's a bit of my background. Born in Zimbabwe, yes.
Beautiful story. So I played rugby for 18 years, albeit far from your level. And so I love rugby deeply. I think of the friends that I've had through it, the experiences, good and bad, that I've had through it, injuries and made and suffered and so on. Um, what is important for you about rugby?
Probably the camaraderie more than anything. And it's been quite an obvious thing for me post rugby and reflecting a lot because people often ask, "Do you miss rugby?" And I go, "Nah, I don't miss rugby, but I do miss the change room. I do miss the socializing side of it. I do miss, just some of the really good characters that you actually have involved there. Because I suppose if you took that group of guys and put them into paddle tennis, or you put them into, I would be like, I love paddle tennis just as much because at the end of the day, and I think this is what I learn is like humans are social animals. So if you find a good troop of other chimps to hang around with, then that's the thing that you kind of miss. It's not really the activity, it's not really the outcome. So yeah, I'd say that the team side of it is definitely something that I notice, especially now because I'm not I've gone from, having maybe 45 people around me on a daily basis to maybe four or three or two, sometimes even one because I work from home. And so you actually get to, you don't know what you got till it's gone. And it's been a really good sign of that. So
What makes me think of two things. The first is I recently had a person on who is responsible, is a hospice doctor. And in the thousands of interviews he's done of people in their last moments of life, the one thing that constantly comes up, the only thing that matters is relationships. And the second comment is I interviewed a French national player, a guy called Denis Charvet. He was an inside center for France, and he talked about how crippling the last whistle blown for the last time he played for France, and how it really was a shock to his system. So for you, when you ended your career, which was a few years ago now, what was that like? Surely that must have brought with it some kind of reflections and emotions.
yeah, I mean, it was I had a slightly different end because I've been toying with retiring for maybe 2 years before I actually did. So I'm lucky enough to have a very driven wife too. And so she was always like, "What's next? What's next?" It's like, please don't ask me what's next. I'm trying to enjoy what the moment is. But sure, obviously when you start to think like that, and it's a really good reflection that I'm kind of reflecting on now too, because if you have a goal that's further than your current goal, it allows things to move forward a lot easier. So for instance, run the London Marathon yesterday. I've got three peaks to come in 2 months' time. So I'm already looking forward to that. I'm already re-energized by it. I'm not sad that the London Marathon journey's over. I'm really reflective, really happy. And it was the same with rugby is I knew what I was going into next and it made that transition easier. So on top of that, I got injured maybe 5 or 4 months before the end of the season. Um, but it was an injury that allowed me to try and play another game. So I did a really interesting wrist injury. So it means I could try and strap up, but it just ended up getting weaker and weaker. So I played two more games and that didn't go well. It was almost ruining my experience of rugby because it was pain, unable to make proper tackles, unable to actually contribute towards
Bind.
the team.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I just, after 2 games, I just said, look, if I carry on, I'm going to end my career in the worst possible headspace I could possibly be in. Whereas the 2 games before that, before I'd injured it, I probably had one of my best games for the last 2 years. And I said, I want to keep that memory. Um, but it is, when I made the decision, it was hard. There was obviously a bit of crying and everything, but it is what it is, isn't it? So
Mm,
I had to accept it. And then I just fully embraced the last 3 or 4 months being around teammates where I could just have coffees. I wasn't, the pressure was off. I wasn't trying to get back for the end of season. I
mm.
was enjoying having coffees, talking, seeing who I could chat and help them with their journey. And I really got to be selfless in that. And in a kind of way, it turned around being selfish because I was just really enjoying doing that, but in doing so, helping other people. So
I suppose, it's like charity. There's always something that comes back if you look for it. It's a wonderful idea, this idea of having your next steps already in mind, because I think if that's your sole ambition to, be capped for Britain or England, and then like Andre Agassi said, when he became number one, it did not make him happier playing, being number one in the world. I want to talk to you about the London Marathon in a moment because that's pretty cool. But what about in your rugby career? You've had so many different things, as you said. You dabbled for England. You played in Zimbabwe, South Africa, for the Chiefs. What was the highlight of your career?
that's a great question. Because you define highlight, define like, is it in front of 80,000 people at Twickenham? Is it in front of 80,000 people at Twickenham for the Chiefs or for England? Is it in front of the home park, the home crowd at Sandy Park? They all come with, it's like when your kid asks you who's the favorite and you go, well, I mean, I love you all in your own way. I don't have a favorite. So highlights are probably going to be all the way back to school. My first team game, I made a really good run. It like set some good confidence. After that game, I got lifted on top of the guys, like some of the school crowd lifted me up and were throwing me up and down, which I was like, why? This is stuff that you see in movies, that can never happen. That's something that I'll never forget. But then again, you go and you win a final, and maybe it's just like, when you don't realize the gravity, I think it's gravity of what you've just accomplished. Whereas at school you do because it's just a school game, and then they make it really special. But when you win a final, it's like it's already a big occasion, and you've won it. That's great. And I've heard a podcast by Johnny Wilkinson. He says the best you'll ever feel is those first 10 seconds after the whistle's blown. And then after that, it just starts to like, you just start to go down. And I think maybe that's why those things, they form highlights, but they're not like my favorite highlights because that school memories never fades. Like that's one thing that I like. You can never take that less. You're never looking at what's next. It was like, wow, this is actually happening. Whereas the final is like, well, now we're going to try and win next year. And it because of the nature of the game, the pressure that comes in, like the speed that you have to be able to move forward from losses and wins, you're just moving forward the whole time. You don't get much time to reflect. Um, so yeah, highlights to answer your question in a short way, back to the beginning, is probably the Twickenham. The more I reflect on it, the more I'm like, that was actually really cool playing against Ireland in the Six Nations game at Twickenham. It's like the more you realize, okay, that was pretty cool. And at the time, I didn't. Um, yeah,
Huh.
that's
At
pretty
the time, you didn't. I mean, I've never represented my country, although I have tried a few times.
it.
But that moment you're off the bench, hey, Armand, your turn. Get up, get ready, go. And then you're running on the pitch. Did that moment not feel like a sink in moment, or like, oh my golly gosh, this is happening?
Oh no. It was that particular game. I had one of my worst chest infections I've ever had in my life.
Oh,
So I was feeling horrible. I went on at eighth man, which wasn't my like seasoned position.
right, you're a
Um,
flanker.
I was a flanker first and foremost. I always wanted to play almost like it was almost like a dream come true because I always wanted to play eight, but there was always someone else that could play eight better, and I could just do flank better. So there was a whole lot of, when people talk about imposter syndrome, imagine having to deal with imposter syndrome as you run on because the last position I expected to go on was eight, and it was the position I went on. So now you've got to go like, okay, where's the eighth man standing? What is these roles? If we go into lineouts, So all those things were going through my mind, and it happened to be on a kickoff. So they kicked it straight to me. I had to catch the ball off kickoff. I caught it.
Yay!
It went well. Yeah, I caught it, of
That that
course.
that that ball floated in the air for hours.
Yeah, it was huge because I also wasn't you wouldn't look at my career and go, Don's great under a high ball. So that was huge for me because it was like I tested myself at like probably one of the really high pressure moments and managed to catch it. So, and no one will know that because it just
Right.
looks, it's one of those moments where it's like everyone just expects you to, but in my head, that was a big thing because that ball, it wasn't just a floaty, it was like a really high, put it on the new guy, let's see if we can tackle him kind of kick. And it went well. So
Yeah, you would only remember it, well, at least everyone else would remember it had you dropped it. And
yeah.
I played fullback, so I had plenty of those up and unders to contend with. So I can relate to that story. Um, about rugby, you presumably lived through some big changes in the game. I mean, I back in my day, we had old-fashioned lineouts and the rules of rucking and and mauling were so much more vague and far less whistled as they are today and called by referees. How do you describe the changes that rugby's gone through, and what do you think of it today?
I think some of them are necessary to keep I mean, every game has to adapt, like has to keep modern. I think that perhaps they just, yeah, I think they have to try and make sure that the game survives, and it's not at the moment. And I think where you create a platform for, like, especially if you look, like some of the biggest things are around health, so mental, whether it would be well-being or actually concussions, and some of the bigger reasons why the tackle area was so looked upon, and why they're bringing brought in those big law changes was around health. And unfortunately, when it comes to health, it's it's essentially one of the biggest human needs, isn't it? So it's always going to pick up a big stink when you've got half the people that are going, this is really great because now everyone's looked after, and half the people that don't recognize the need for it going, you're ruining the game. I think some of the classic things are these guys know what they signed up for. And it's like, no, you don't. Like, no one really knows what concussion's about. And if I said to you, you can play this game, but if you get 6 head knocks, you're going to end up with dementia. If you've got any sense about it, you're probably like, oh, it's not worth it. Um, and so the change in the game, I think they come around that courage from leadership perspective to be able to implement rules without knowing the exact outcomes of it. And then you're having to deal with, I don't know if you've ever looked at like culture change models. It's like you're always going to get the laggards and you're going to hit the early adapters. And it's such a good experiment to see, especially from a leadership perspective, is looking at that Kubler-Ross curve change and seeing who the laggards are. And they like, because the internet is the internet and people can just type whatever they want without any consequences. I literally go, oh, there's an early adapter, there's a laggard, who's in the middle? They're probably not saying anything. And just trying to go through that and see how people adapt to change, because I don't think it changes much whether you're in an organization, a sport, or in life. All our drivers are the same. The outcome just looks different. So I think, whether to say rugby's heading in the right direction, I think what they might be missing is more commercialized. Like I've always said, I really hope America takes off with their rugby because they're going to copy their commercial models that NFL, and they're really good at doing that to their sport. Whereas if you get the old school rugby as a gentleman's game, we're going to make sure that you stay quiet about it. It's not about money. It's essentially going to stay back in those times. It's not. Whereas actually, if we commercialize it, bought lots of money in and made it what it was, it would be a better product. If the point to keep the game alive was to keep people playing, then that's what they need to do. So this is easy for me to say because I don't have any stake in it, but that's how I see it.
Well, you do in some regards because your career is linked to it, and for me anyway, I feel attached to rugby even if I haven't played. I had 7 concussions in total, and 5 of them on rugby pitch, and so I certainly, well, I got over 6,
Yeah.
and maybe I'll have dementia then. But I feel like maybe I'm a laggard, maybe conservative in appreciating the way I got to play rugby, and I got injured. and yet I think it was one of the most formative points of my life. And the issue, what I think we're addressing with this health story, is this idea of acceptance of risk
Yeah.
and the courage to overcome it in spite of risk. If we remove the risk, what sort of adventure is it? And so I'm wondering if, well, and let's maybe chime in with notions of resilience and how society is. You have 4 kids. Where are we in society, and this idea of precaution, health, resilience, concussions, damage?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, isn't it? And I think for me, I feel like people, they try to have extreme stances. You're either one side or the other. And if we forget that there's a midpoint, and you were saying there about like understanding the risks and having the courage to take it, it's like someone either argues that you've got to eliminate all injuries, or someone says you've got to actually just accept all injuries. And I go, no, you can also try and see what suits best. So if you say in a sport like paddle, you could do your knee, your ankle, your shoulder, your elbow, but you'll never hurt your head. That's more attractive. Oh,
Well,
you have.
I've had one concussion
Oh,
on a paddle
in
court.
paddle. Wow.
Going back, indeed. So I was in during the COVID, just to stop you, but I went back for a quick lob, and I dove for it, but my head and my racket were heavier than my feet, and so I ended up crashed on my head, vomiting that evening with
Oh,
the
wow.
effects of concussion and in the hospital. But that said, on balance, it's a less dangerous sport than rugby. So let's go
Yeah.
with the narrative.
That's, for example, whereas like, if we can try and mitigate the long-term risk, because as you start to find out more science and everything like that, finds out more about the injuries, you're going to have a very health conscious society coming up. And any game that doesn't suit the health conscious society is just not going to last. I think we can either bury our heads in the sand, or we can adapt, because they're doing brain studies, they're doing body studies. Like, you can get blood tests now that tell you your gut microbiomes. And now we're going to go into like, are you taking painkillers every weekend to play rugby? Well, did you know that those painkillers are getting rid of your gut lining, and that's going to lead to this? Immediately, you're going to have so many things that are going, what you're doing is detrimental to you. They might be extreme in terms of, how science papers work, is like, you don't know how to really understand what it's trying to say. And that's why they can have such damning effects and be completely wrong. But at the same time, people will take those and go, you're going to die in 10 years' time because you're taking these painkillers and you're concussed. Whereas actually, that's not what that paper says at all. But the point is, people are more aware. And I think COVID brought that change about. So actually, we've got to make sure that we're adapting the sports, that's especially if it's for the masses, to be able to suit, if it wants to survive. Because I think any game that doesn't suit is just gonna die out a little bit more and more. I say that, but MMA brings in a lot of money, doesn't it? But again, those guys,
Even an
that's in
NFL
that case, I think
football.
they do understand the risks. They really do understand the risks, and they accept them. Like, there's no way in getting away from, if you do MMA, you could break bones, you could get concussed, you are going to, and they know it. Whereas I think the difference is rugby is people are starting to become more aware of concussion, and that's where you lose. You look at like community level, half the kids are stopping now because their parents are going, I don't want them concussed. Whereas you look back to when you were played as a kid and you're like, there was no such thing as concussion back then.
Well, there was, but it was sort of it was an obscure concept, really.
Yeah. Oh, you
To
got a
your
headache.
point,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And you're just dizzy, and vomiting. But I wonder if it should all be about accommodating and acquiescing to society's demands. And so I'm just pushing back a little bit, Don, because I observe that society doesn't feel well.
Yeah.
And so is the answer less difficulty to actually get better? If in a world where we're going to take away contact from rugby and make our microbiomes all perfect and eat granola and lovely things, at the same time we have spiraling much higher levels of anxiety, depression,
Yeah.
suicide. It's not, I can't say there's a causation in there,
No,
but there seems like a correlation.
I like what you're saying there. And I think the best way I could sum this up is stress can do the same stress can have two different outcomes. In one, it makes you shrink, and in one, it makes you grow. And the difference is how you perceive that stress. And so I don't think that we should be acquiescing to society's demands. I think we should be educating and saying, if you're going to do this, this is what the risks are. And as soon as people have an intrinsic motivation to understand and make the choice, you get rid of the anxiety. But I think the problem is people are doing stuff and they think they don't have a choice. So therefore the stress is making them shrink. So we're not empowering everyone. We're just essentially we're going, oh, you could die, this could happen, that could happen, so stop doing it. But actually, it's not that simple. It's like, well, anything in life has its risks. Let's lean into the challenges. Let's lean into the danger. That's how you grow. So, for instance, doing ice baths, you could get a doctor that says, what about the micro traumas that you could have to your heart and all that kind of stuff? And you do get people saying that. But until you've actually gotten in and you realize what it does for you and how much it empowers you and everything, nothing's going to change that. So it's almost having that empowered mindset versus the disempowered mindset. I speak about that. Like that's a big thing for me at the moment. I think society's got a disempowered mindset due to the narrative that's being put out there. And we've got to try and empower people somehow.
Putting my foot last time into an ice bath, I recall the feeling. And my cousin Nale was sitting in his bath, smiling away and just applauding life, if you will, while I was deep breathing, thinking of all the shuddering
Shrieking,
pain. Yeah. I mean, and I tried, and my excuse was I'm 15 years older than he is, but I suspect that's not going to hold water when I'm speaking with you.
Yeah.
What is it about educating yourself that gets that pain to be just a little less horrible and excruciating and unbearable?
So it gives a different perspective to the same situation. So for example, and it's probably a really good example because it's a tangible thing that everyone can understand around stress, is if your chimp, I always call it your chimp, your inner, biology is fight or flight survival. That's at a core essence. If you think that humans aren't here to survive, then amazing, we've got a lot to learn from you, or you've got to just get a balance. And it's just saying when you're in extreme heat or extreme cold, your survival instincts are going to kick in. And so that's going to make you want to get yourself away from it. But if you can almost take charge of that chimp, the survival instinct, say, look, this is going to make us better. I know that it's going to be cold, but it's going to be activating this and it's going to be empowering this. This is what's going to be happening. It's going to be making me stronger for doing this. All of a sudden you put your foot in, you're like, yes, this is still cold, but it's good for me. It's still cold. No, and I'm going to go down. It's still really cold, but it's good for me. And just because you're telling yourself it's good for you, you've got that strength to carry on. Whereas the person that just goes, oh, I like the idea of an ice bath. Oh my goodness, this is cold. There's no ways that's good for you. You can they haven't got any structures to fall back on when the pain gets sore to go, this is what's meant to be happening. This is how, remember, this has been spoken about. You are meant to be going through this. And because I think it's that fear of the unknown. As soon as you make the unknown known, people are able to predict and then be more resilient. But when you put someone into the unknown, their resilience will drop because they don't know whether it's going to kill them or not. And I think that's the difference. So if you can educate people around things, they know that they're going to survive and they're going to grow, or they know that they're going to die, so they're not going to do it. And I think that's at the end of the day is what, if you try and be deep and simple, it's going, well, you will survive if you do this, but it's going to be tough, but on the other side, it'll be better. Or actually don't do that because you're not going to survive if you do this. Then you'll see people will stop doing the stuff that's really bad for them, and they'll start doing the stuff that's tough, but they know they're not going to die. And that's why they can endure, and that's how they can be resilient. And ice bar is probably a really good example.
Yeah, I suppose it also, maybe depending on the character, needs to be anchored into some facts. What is it good about? Like just wishing a prayer. Don says it's good for me. Not enough. For me, I'd need to know that this is going to help me with this issue. It's going to do this to my body, the chemical, biochemical reactions, or this and that. That might help me getting in. And it made my little monkey brain, speaking of monkeys, went to how having a relationship with somebody, married for 28 years myself, knowing that we have a project together allows us to get through the fights and the confrontations that inevitably happen. So it makes me think of the same idea, sort of going into the ice bath. It's a challenge, it's a fight,
Yeah.
but I know why I'm doing it. We have a project, me in the ice bath,
Yeah.
to
Very
to
good.
make something better.
So, and I think it's one of those that I can't remember the saying exactly, but it said if you want to get the best out of people, you have to unite them into something bigger than themselves. So that project, that's where you want to go, is bigger than where you currently are. So you're going to do whatever it is to get there. I think Ice Bars is a good example that your marriage is, and well done, by the way, 28 years is very respectable. And that is uniting you guys bigger than just yourself. And that's why we can put ourselves forward to it. And I mean, back onto your thing about facts, I'm trying to I put together an ice bath course for exactly that, because I get frustrated when people buy an ice bath, use it for 3 weeks, and then sit there looking at it going, oh, I'm a failure. I can't do it. I'm like, no, it's just, you just need to know a little bit about that and it'll help you. Like, there's so many different reasons people do it: health, desire, just wanting a change, just for a challenge. And people don't think about that. As soon as you start to really hone into your reasons why you're doing it, and then you can look at how you're doing it. I, like everyone says, I could never do that. I'm saying, that sounds like a challenge. Can we talk? And then I try and get them in, because people just walk around with these blocks all the time. I'm like, no, like there's no difference between you and me and our ice bath tolerance. There's literally none. Unless you've got like some really deep medical reason not to, it's just a mental thing. And if it's just a mental thing, great, because we can build that up. And that's obviously an analogy for life and stress, and whether you're going to play rugby because of the injuries or not, and resilience and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's where we go back to empowering mindsets is such a key thing to be able to do in where society's heading.
Mm. Makes me lean into this idea of the bigger why. And while many people might have some vague idea of why they exist and what it's all about, it's never, I think one of the challenges is making it crystal clear. And then you can anchor into it in such a tighter way.
Yeah. No, I think we have to. And how do you make something that's really big crystal clear though? I think sometimes it's the smallest. Yeah, that is the challenge. When you can make a bigger goal crystal clear, and crystal clear probably means that everyone that sees it understands it, rather than just 1/3 of the people see it, understand it. I think that's when you get more unity. That's a good point.
This, I think, is a good conduit to talking about captaincy and
Yeah.
leadership. So you had the chance to be captain of the Exeter Chiefs. You presumably observed captaincy while playing for England and the other teams that you've played for. What is the place of the why and or coming for a bigger purpose? I mean, the fact is, when you're a professional athlete, you're there for a job. The coach tells you stuff, and you've got to win. I win, I get money. How do you organize captaincy to be effective in your experience?
Well, I always thought, because I got the leadership business now, I realize how much more there is to it than just being the natural self. And I sometimes go, I wish I'd actually done some leadership training when I was captain, or actually been around people that were really focused on it, because as good as some people might be naturally, there's just some aspects that are good to talk about, be surrounded by, so that you can actually do a more effective job. And I think the first thing you realize is that not everyone thinks the way you do. Not everyone's motivated by the same thing. So where you see like a coach that'll use money as a thing, like some people just don't. Money doesn't, like, I've got everything I need. There's no reason that putting a incentive here is going to make me get up in the morning and be more motivated. And some people are. There's also some people that need that why. Like, what am I putting my body on the line for? Why am I going into rugby and sacrificing time with family for what? Just to win one season? Again, I'm not motivated by just winning. I want to know I'm part of something bigger. And I think that's where effective captaincy would come in, because they would, especially from a sport perspective, your captain would have to have a good relationship with your coaches to make sure that they know how to get the why said properly, so that the coaches aren't deviating from what the captain said. So we talk about alignment there. Um, and then being able to spill that down to the team. Because I think there's definitely times where you can get a super talented team that are unmotivated. And as soon as you try to throw money at them, it's honestly, it's the money's going to do well for the first 30 minutes. And then they're going to be like, you know what? That doesn't matter, because there's just levels. And I think that's where your question about the why will always come in at the darkest moment. And that's why you can see, if we transfer this over to people living with like life-ending diseases and everything, the ones that have a why to live either overcome it or last a lot longer, because that fight in them goes deeper than anyone else can actually try and motivate out of them. That's why you can try and motivate someone and it just falls on deaf ears because they don't have the why. I think having a deep why is the thing that gets people winning a tight game with 1 minute to go, because they have that extra bit of energy that comes from flip. If we lose this, we don't get X. And then if that's the moment that you need a big why. And I think that's, looking back at the Chiefs' journey, is they always wanted to win the double. And that was like a 12-year journey. And so that would mean that when you, at the beginning of a season, lost a game, it wasn't the season was over. It was, what can we learn to get closer to the double? What can we learn to get closer to the trophy? And I think that's the difference, is if you unite a big goal, united with a big why, then the journey you always get to look forward to something. Because if you failed, it's okay, because now we get to learn. Whereas if you don't have the why and then the bigger goal, you failed, it's very hard to get perspective because you're zoomed in. So you want to be able to zoom out and be like, look, it doesn't matter. We just know not to do that again, because that's not going to get us close to the goal. So I think effective captaincy is having a very good understanding of the why, of the bigger goal, but also being able to change the message, that it stays the same but gets interpreted differently or said differently to the different individuals and what motivates them. Because if you get a touchy-feely message to someone that's not touchy-feely, they're going to probably think you're an ineffective captain, and then vice versa. So it's about really, I suppose the simplest answer is understand the individual differences, and how that it's not just ever one size fits all. You have to be able to, in a high performing environment, if you want to get the best out of individuals, you have to treat them as individuals within a team, not just treat them as a team of the same robotic kind of people.
Well, what underlies that principle means getting to know each of them.
Yeah.
And in a personal manner, because are you interested by money? Are you going to say that right away to a stranger? Maybe, maybe not. Are you interested in the big why? Well, what's a why? I've never heard of it before. It's not a concept I know. And well, figuring out how to get under the skin of each can be challenging, because it requires some sort of vulnerability. What ways do you architect that type of vulnerability when you are leading and wishing to adopt or adapt the message according to the person you're talking to?
I think, well, if you're the captain, you have that's where the understanding the extra privileges that come with being captain, and more so elevated to coach. Like, you have to be able to spend time with people, because you can't force vulnerability, but you can not force, you can nurture connection. And when you nurture connection, vulnerability is a side effect. I mean, sport has different ways where, say in rugby, you can get someone to do a 3-slide presentation of who they are, where they've come from, what are their highlights, what are their hardships. Immediately, you'll create a rapport in the room. Now, if you're doing that, and then as the captain, you're remembering that, and afterwards go and just spend 2 minutes being like, I didn't even know that you were going through that. I'm really sorry. Or, wow, you've come from that background. That's essentially a way of getting vulnerability. And then you can pick out very quickly who the people are that weren't prepared to be vulnerable, and you just spend more time with getting to know them by just asking them simple, plain questions, and you'll pick up. It might take longer with some, but that's where that like leadership takes effort, and it's not measured, and it takes, personal effort, I think, especially in a team environment, because everyone wants to feel like they're part of something bigger, but they won't necessarily know that until you dig a bit deeper.
So I'd be interested to know. I've discussed this a couple of times over the hundreds of podcasts, but the difference between captaining a professional team and a national team. Obviously, you didn't captain England, but what did you observe any differences and what it takes? Is it just the same skills or just a different ball game?
Um, from the different clubs I've been at, so like there's that say Stormers, Chiefs, England. It was a really interesting to look at the dynamic between how the coach coached and interacted with the captain and how that spilled down into the players. So the one that treated the captain as an equal, asked opinions, wasn't doing it in a dictatorship style, had a much better cohesion in the team than the one that was kind of like running it like it was a 50 million pound plus revenue business where you had your hardcore leader or manager, should I say, we're going, have you got your accountabilities? Have you done your responsibilities and how that's going? And it's my way or the highway, and how that spilled down to the, it really tested the strength of the leader. And I'm not saying the teams on purpose because it doesn't really matter. It was just the relationships and how that it stopped. So I think sometimes a coach's style can really stifle the ability for a captain to captain well. And I think where you get alignment between captain style and coach style is where you get alignment all the way through because they're on the same page. But if you get a captain and a coach that are on a different page, or even a coach and coach on a different page, that spills down. And so we always like keeping it simple, even if you go into a cultural alignment program in a company, it always starts at the top. And I know that people say it, but like if you're not aligned at the top, I'm not going to waste my time with anyone else because you will just ruin the whole thing. And when you can see that, I can see with your body language, but I think it's that it goes even deeper. And it's like if you're not aligned with yourself, stop bothering with anything outside of you. Because if you're not aligned with what you're doing, it's just going to be taking energy and it's not going to work when the chips go down and the heat really comes on. That lack of alignment is what's get highlighted. So the more you can work on alignment with self, then team, and all that kind of stuff, the less inconsistencies you're going to get.
Amen. Yeah,
Yeah.
my third or fourth book was called "You Lead: How Being Yourself Makes You a Better Leader."
Ah, I
And
like that title.
in your title on LinkedIn, you say "Lead yourself before you lead others."
Yeah.
So let's just dig in on that a second, because you talk about building your self confidence as well. How do you think about the idea of actually knowing yourself?
Not being scared to fail. And I think that's a big one. And by not being scared to fail means by virtue of that, you're doing stuff. Because when you're doing stuff, you're trying. And when you're trying, you're putting yourself out there and you're getting to really know if you're good at something, if you're not. So doing a lot of work on, if you're with a partner, being able to, like, how willing are you to apologize? How willing are you to listen to someone else's opinion? How willing are you to recognize when it's your self-importance at play or your ego at play? Um, I mean, if you can really reflect on the statement, we judge others how we judge ourselves. And when you're speaking or fighting, listen to what you're saying and understand that you should be saying that to yourself and not getting that chimp that comes in and goes, no, no, you're right. It's them. That's where that leading yourself becomes a big thing, because if you can recognize what you're doing to others, that's coming from somewhere inside, because you can't see things that aren't part of your thought process. And it's having that humbleness to be able to say, oh, I've got some work to do. I've got some work to do. But it's hard because some people say that that self-aware journey can just send you into such depths that you end up being completely frazzled. But actually, I think that there's a point that you have to keep going. You have to make sure that you're always looking at yourself, leading yourself. Because if you can lead yourself, you can recognize those things in others. And when you can recognize them in others, then you have a much better ability to lead them, because you aren't faking what you're doing. You're having a better intrinsic connection with others. And that's why, like, someone told me the guy's name, but I can't remember it. It was a principal, and he wrote it in 1938, and it was theory and experience. Um, I know the date was 1938, but I keep forgetting the name. But they were saying the principle of, if you've just got theory, it's not going to take you far enough. The experience is what can really take you to the next level. And then I've always thought that if you can combine theory and experience, that becomes a very good way of interacting and say if we put into the leadership context leading, it's like, I know this tool works, not because the book tells me it does, but because I know how it applies. But the tool simplifies my experience through that theory. And then that's why we should try and explore this and do it in your way. So yeah, I can go on and on about that.
That's good. Well, I'll make sure to find that quote and we'll put it in the show notes on the thing. It's true that behind theories, it's not the idea of knowledge and models and everything. And I what I liked about the way you described it was that this idea of getting to know yourself, you sort of ask yourself questions like, how willing, or what's the presence of, what's the motivation of. And Shane Parrish, who wrote Clear Thinking, borrowed this thought from somebody else, which is make the invisible visible.
Yeah.
Where you have these motivations, but they're sort of within you. And until you've made them explicit and you make connections into them, it's very hard for you to really understand what's motivating you, the monkey brain and such.
Yeah, I like that. It kind of like that sums up for me the Johari's window. Have you seen that?
I have. I can't
Yeah.
remember it exactly off by
No,
heart,
so
but
it's that for anyone listening, it's basically there's 4 quadrants. The one quadrant is the things you know about yourself and the things others know. The second quadrant is the things you know but others don't know. The third quadrant is things that others know about yourself that you don't know. And then the fourth quadrant is the things that you don't know about yourself and no one else knows. And you expand or you shrink those boxes or expand them, whichever you want to look at it, by asking for feedback, by trying things, by really going deep. And obviously, the smaller that block of things you don't know and no one else knows, the more aware you are. But the bigger that block, the less aware you are. So that was the kind of one thing that started my self-awareness journey, because I was like, oh, I think that last dark space, the dark, that like Simba talks to Mufasa and he talks about like the elephant graveyard. That's how I say, like, we don't touch the darkness. And that's kind of where I was like, I need to go there. So I was exactly like Simba. You go on a journey and you experience exactly what's in there.
and I do feel that, well, I mean, that's basically one of the core tenets of a book I'm writing, which is this notion of darkness and our ability to lean into the darkness.
Yeah.
It's sort of easy to put yourself on an Instagram post and looking fantastic and look at me, I'm ripped, I just did this great workout and such, but showing you crying after being beaten, or after failing bigly in some way or other, it's a whole other space. And as a society, I feel like we're less prepared to do that, accept it, talk about it, because it opens up too many worms and casts us in a bad light.
Yeah, and I think that the next stage to that is it also gets interpreted the wrong way. And I can't remember who I said this to, but I said, if you're on a self-aware journey and you use vulnerability as a thing with, say, your partner or your team, so maybe in leadership, if you're vulnerable with a team, because everyone says you got to be vulnerable, but if you're vulnerable, someone's going to take advantage of that vulnerability. They're going to undermine everything you're trying to do, because they're just going to make you seem weak to your team. They're going to be like, oh, this is not the kind of person, because they know how to put points together that seem logical. So you have to, and like, I also think like Instagram and social media, it's like if there's 100 points that you would need to know to understand why this person is crying, why they're being vulnerable, and what makes that so powerful, Instagram will give you 5 of them. And by having only 5, you won't get the full context, and you go, well, I don't want to be like that. And you move on, but you don't recognize the depth to which that goes and the strength to which that actually allows you. And I think that's the problem. That's one of the issues or challenges. I think that social media is amazing for certain things. They can get really good points across that you wouldn't have come across before, but they also lack a depth that you would need to really take a core principle that can change your life, because you've just moved on within the first 10 seconds and gone, well, I don't understand why he's putting that on here. And then if you even go, oh, this is interesting, that guy's crying or that girl's crying, and you go and look at the comments, and the comments are filled with people that don't understand it and are, just, oh, why is this on Instagram, this person, and they can argue well, and you just go, okay, yeah, maybe they're right. And I think that's where the challenge comes in, is like, we have to, as people, we have to learn to think for ourselves, but we haven't been taught to think for ourselves. And I'm hopefully trying to learn that, but there's so many instances where I go, why was I doing that? It's just because that's how you've been taught to do it. But if we can learn to think for ourselves, think critically, and take each case individually and go, actually, no, he has got it wrong, or he has got it right, not because of what everyone else has said, but because how I see it. That's when you get, I think, a lot further is learning to think for yourself.
It does need you to have a strong moral compass, something that you're aware of. What do you mean by good and bad? And are you doing it for performative reasons, or is there a proper link between you and that goodness? And at the same time, are you aware of your badness? Because it's very easy to pontificate or call out bad things. But I regularly talk about how we hold up to a higher standard than we hold ourselves to things like psychedelics or artificial intelligence or even politicians. We're very quick to call out. It's easier to criticize others than it is to know ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Well, I think in some people, I think there are some people that that can be quite critical of themselves and not critical of others.
All right.
Um,
Yeah, that
yeah, and
happens
I
for
think that's
sure.
an interesting balance.
Which brings up this point of self-confidence. I wanted the hat tip because we're recording this the day after you ran a sub 4 hour, sorry, marathon, the London Marathon. Congratulations for that.
Thank you.
How does one build self-confidence without it going overboard into arrogance?
That's a good question. I think that there might be certain traits that people have that are always going to keep them keep the humility, humble, sorry. Um, and I think that sometimes overconfidence can come across as arrogance, but certain people will be born with what everyone else sees as imposter syndrome, I think is a blessing, because it stops you from being a bull in a china shop wherever you go. And that again, that's just looking at something in a different way. And I think there might be extremes to imposter syndrome that everyone's adopted thinking, yeah, that's me. But actually, there's some people that are in extreme imposter syndrome that I would say that's imposter syndrome. And there's some people that just need to build their confidence and they think that they have imposter syndrome and that starts to cripple them. So building self-confidence for me is about learning not to lie to yourself. So I'm going to do this. So then do it and do it small. Because I think what we do is we see someone on Instagram, we get told by an advisor, you should, go for a 20 kilometer total load run in a week. But they don't understand what you've got going on in your past, what you're going on in your present, what other time demands you have. So then you go, yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. And then you don't do it. That doesn't build your self-confidence. So I'd say building your self-confidence starts with the small things that you do every day. So if it's just going, I'm going to make my bed every day, and you commit to doing that, you would never think you're building your self-confidence until you've done it for 6 months and you go, oh, I'm able to do something else now. And then you start to habit stack all of these other things because you started something really small. So that's just speaking from experience with my journey is I'm not a person that was notorious. I never used to make my bed. I never used to have a morning routine, nothing. I used to literally for rugby, I used to wake up at 5 to 7 with my clothes on the floor, get my clothes on and leave at 7 o'clock. That was my morning routine. Um, Whereas now it's like cold shower, make the bed, get dressed, ice bath, do a bit of exercise, do some journaling if I have time for it. And doing those every day, even if I don't feel like it, that's built my self-confidence way more than when I was a top performing rugby player. Like now, my self-confidence now, because I do things for me that are really small every single day, have built my self-confidence up to be able to go, I'm going to run a sub 4 hour marathon when everyone says, no, you're not. That's really hard. How can you do that? And I know that all I have to do is the small bits of training for 3 months' time, for the previous 3 months. And if I do those, the sub 4 marathon isn't going to be hard to get. If I don't do those, then I'm not going to go get them. So it's like the self confidence in that analogy would be your sub 4 hour marathon, but it's not the sub 4 hour marathon that gets you self confidence. It's all the training you do for that. Does that make sense?
It does. I wonder to what extent announcing that you want to do a sub 4 hour to others participates in the sticking to and the consistency of your small routines?
Yeah. So interestingly, I never announced to anyone because that was something that I almost like there was a different side of fear of failure. Because if you tell them, oh, but now they're gonna. So I probably only told 6 to 7 people that I actually wanted to do that. Everyone else, I was just running. So, but for me, it was like it was a deeply personal goal. So, like there, I had this note which has got the marathon times on it, the pace
Mm-hmm.
times. So
Mm-hmm.
846 miles
Per
and
mile.
527 kilometer. And I ended up, and that was like trying to get 351. I ended up getting 356. So I was just short of that pace. But I never announced to anyone that other than maybe 1 or 2 people that I trusted. And then the day before, I would almost test, how you like, oh, I'm trying to break sub 4. And both people I said, oh, that's really difficult. If only it was that easy. And then I had to stop telling because I was like, they're just going by their own self-confidence, their own beliefs, how they've tried, how they see it, are creating barriers for me. Um, and so yeah, I didn't announce it just because I exactly wanted to test that. Is like it was all about creating accountability for myself, which was a big focus. I didn't want to be accountable because I'd said it, because I feel like if you can do things for you and just you build your self-confidence up. If you're doing things for other people, you're actually building up your accountability self-confidence. And I think there's a difference.
So I would like to just dovetail that thought into ambition, bigger why. Let's
Yeah.
say that, oh, I really want to win a tournament. Whoop-de-doo,
Yeah.
I won the tournament. Oh, yeah. And I did everything I needed to win the tournament with my partner playing, and I did, by the way. But
Nice.
so what? Is it not important that is it enough to say I'm just doing this because I want to build my confidence? Is that a big enough why? I mean, why are you trying to build your confidence? Maybe, where do you put the flag in the sand as to the link with some bigger ambition, purpose of what you're doing?
Yeah, so it's so interesting. When you were talking there, my mind went to, well, actually, why am I trying to build my self-confidence? It's because I've got a very big, hairy, audacious goal that if I'm speaking at someone's funeral, I want to give the best eulogy of that person. I want to be the person that people can come to for strength at a time when they're feeling at their lowest, because I think there's a massive privilege in that, but that takes self-confidence to be able to step up and go, I know that I'm going to deliver this well because of that person. And I also, when I'm on my deathbed, I don't want to have any regrets and I want to be able to lift my kids up when I'm 70. I want to be my grandkids. I want to be fully present. So when you talk about self-confidence, that's almost become a byproduct of me trying to build that 70-year-olds or 90, whatever age I'm in my deathbed, being healthy, if I even get to deathbed, if I just drop dead one day when I'm older, it's like all of those things I know that I have to keep healthy. In order to keep healthy, I've got started to do ice bath every day. And if I'm doing ice bars, it's then started to build my self-confidence. I'm like, wow, when you actually have self-confidence, these things start to happen. So if you set big, hairy goals and you have that why to keep going on them, the journey towards setting them allows you to uncover so much more, as opposed to, so for your example there, if you just won a tournament, it'd be great when you bring in ego earlier. It's like, maybe that's for ego, maybe it's not. But if you actually go, I want to win a tournament because when I have grandkids, I want to look back and say, this was the journey I went on. There's no ego in that, because you're doing it for something that's like, I'm a big person for legacy. And it's not about your name and legacy. It's about like, what characteristics have you instilled in the generations coming after you that are going to be there still in play when you're no longer around? And you only instill those by doing. And those are the kind of things I'm discovering by setting that initial big, hairy goals, that vision, the why. All of these things start to get uncovered because you're working towards something. But it only started with one small thing, which was, I think it was like cold showers, because I was like, I need to be consistent. So you start with one thing, and then all these other things start to get uncovered.
Lovely. Well, maybe it's the epigenetic legacy.
Yeah.
Don, it's been great to have you on the show. I really want to thank Chris again for putting us in touch and chat with you about all things rugby, leadership, Legacy, great topics. You run the Samson Armand Leadership Legacy. How can people follow you, track you down, hire you? What are the best links that you could like to send people to?
Yeah, thanks very much for having me on today. It's been amazing. I really enjoyed being able to chat to people at a good in-depth level. That's my thing. But
Sweet.
LinkedIn's probably the easiest place because it's I manage that. So I'm posting on there every Tuesday and Thursday, replying to messages. You can go through the website, but essentially it's quite outdated. I still have to update that. Whereas LinkedIn has direct contact to me. And even if it's just following or messaging or having conversations, it doesn't have to be getting work. I think like building relationships to me is far more important because, I think if you have a good network of people, there might be 2 years down the line where we've chatted and I either need work from you or you need work from me. But if you don't make those connections, then the connection isn't there. So
Amen to that, Don. As we said
yeah,
at the very outset, it is all about relationships.
yeah,
Fabulousness, Don. I look forward to having a chance to share a real beer in real time, in real
yeah.
place somewhere along the line. Stay in touch, and thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks very much, Minta.